stay tuned because for the next 60 minutes, Motorsports Unlimited is on the air. Hi, I'm Jerry Bryant, and these are the lovely ladies of motorsports. And all this hour, we're going to have 60 minutes of action-packed excitement. All kinds of exciting things will happen. And we got the famous Bill Wildt, and we got all kinds of other good stuff that's happening all this hour. Motorsports Unlimited, 60 minutes of non-stop action. So let's go to the studio right now, huh?
Thanks, Jerry, and hi, everybody. Welcome to the studio headquarters of Chicagoland's most watched, most talked about Access television series. I'm Samantha Bentley, and this is the 934th edition of Motorsports Unlimited. Today, it's part 3 of our series titled Motorcycling Rediscovered. If you'll recall, in part 1, we showed you how Bill's interest in motorcycling was reinvigorated, how he acquired a bike, and how he set it up for touring. We visited with him at the Indiana state line, then again at South Bend Speedway, and once more at the Ohio state line. In part 2, we spent time with him in Toledo, Ohio, and at the Pennsylvania state line. Simultaneously, Janine has been sharing passages about Bill's first motorcycle trip 40 years ago from his book he wrote 20 years ago. He and his high school friend Todd attempted to ride their motorcycles from Chicago to Kansas City by way of Route 66 when they were 21 years old. They suffered uncountable mechanical and lack of preparation problems, but they were soldiering on regardless. When we left the story last week, they were in the parking lot of a tavern out in the wilderness somewhere on Route 66, still some distance from St. Louis, repairing Todd's Norton. Again. Janine?
When we left Bill and Todd before, they just finished adjusting Todd's primary chain and had now accomplished the impossible. They were even filthier than they were before. They were determined to get to St. Louis without stopping again. Let's see what happened. The arch that greets travelers when approaching St. Louis is a beautiful thing. It was sunset, and I wondered why they built it. I had heard about it, of course, but I was surprised at how big it was. It dominated the skyline, and if its purpose was to make their city memorable, they succeeded in spades. Todd and I motored into a large empty parking lot in the downtown area. We shut down our mounts and put them on their center stands. We had spotted a YMCA and figured that would be a good, low-buck place to shower and clean up. We walked around the corner and checked with the deskman. "You mean you have to rent a room?" I stopped the man as he was rattling off prices. "Yep." "You don't have a swimming pool here with a locker room and shower facilities?" "Nope. This is a YMCA hotel." Back at the bikes, we were pondering our dilemma. Even the YMCA prices were out of our reach if our money was to last a week. Of course, we didn't want to touch our drinking money. We had planned to take a room only once on the trip, at the midway point of our destination. But boy, we're re-grubby now. The continuous work on the bikes and their continuous secretion of fluids had us looking and smelling like we had lived in the bottom of a grease pit. "Let's go get something to eat, and then decide what we're going to do," I suggested. "What kind of pigsty would let us in?" he countered. Good point, Todd. We were sitting on our bikes now in the empty parking lot, considering our options. Suddenly, his horn was on like it was stuck or something. I turned to see what he was doing and was startled to see the underside of his bike and the bottoms of his shoes still on the foot pegs, as if he had just decided to lay the bike over on its side with him still sitting on it. "What are you doing, man?" "Come on, help me," he exclaimed. I got off my bike to see if I could help him or if he was just pulling my leg. No, sure enough, he was stuck under the bike. I lifted it off of him, and he came up fighting mad, furious with the motorcycle, the trip, me, and oh yeah, God. "What happened?" I leaned over to tie my shoe, and the next thing I knew, my head hit the pavement. "Are you okay?" "My head hurts. I'm going to have one hell of a headache." He said it shortly and crisply, like it was my fault. I examined the bike and the pavement, and sure enough, the asphalt was a little soft from the hot weather, and the center stand had dug in deeper on one side than the other, apparently from when he transferred his weight to one side of the machine when he leaned over to tie his shoe. "The mirror's really bent this time," I said, as I was trying to determine if there was any real damage. "You better quit fooling around, or this bike isn't going to survive the journey." He glared at me without saying anything while still massaging his head. My humor was lost on him for the moment. "Now this is more like it, Todd," I observed as I looked around at our surroundings and realized I'd have to do a little selling job on him if I were going to keep him from going into depression on me. It was a small restaurant, not fancy, but it looked like it would have a decent washroom where we could clean up a little. I told the waitress to bring us some Cokes and menus and to point us toward the washroom. We used our change of clothes and nearly used the sink for a bathtub. We weren't really clean, but we felt better. Fresh clothes and a little cleaned up, plus some pretty good food, and Todd seemed to be revived again. He was actually laughing at the incident in the parking lot, though he claimed it was because of the way I was describing it. "The whole incident only took seconds, and you're taking an hour to describe it," he said defensively. "Just think how funny it will be by the time we get home, and I've had a chance to think about it and embellish it a little," I said in a playful mood. "Well, should we try to make Kansas City tonight, Todd?" I asked. "Actually, I'd like to find a laundromat first, so we can wash these filthy clothes. Then we'll have something clean to wear when we get there," Todd offered. Good idea," I agreed. We fired up the bikes and started cruising around looking for a place. It was quite dark now, but a really nice summer evening. The downtown area was surprisingly quiet, I thought, compared to Chicago. After about 10 minutes of reconnaissance looking for an open laundromat, our attention was diverted. "Girls, girls, girls." The sign screamed for our attention. We both looked at each other and in a moment knew we were of the same mind. Time for some fun. It couldn't have been a better setup, an open parking space right in front. As we went into the place, we knew our luck had changed. 3 female bartenders in hot pants, a go-go dancer on the stage behind the bar, and cocktail waitresses in mini-skirts. We sat at the bar. Now I know it's not fashionable to admit it, but I've always been overwhelmed by the ladies, especially fancy painted ladies. Their effect on me is best described as intoxicating. It's an effect that I've never been quite able to fully describe at this point in my life. I was pretty sure that if I could fully understand it, I'd have more control over the spell the girls were able to cast. I'm the only guy I know that became familiar with push-up, underwired bras, and the illusion they created. I also investigated the purpose of the French cut brief that seemed to lengthen their legs. Oh yeah, the technique of using 2 and 3 sets of false eyelashes to accent the eyes. Despite the research and subsequent knowledge, I never was able to get a handle on the effect these fancy painted ladies had on me. It seemed that individually, each component was benign. Upon seeing bulging breasts, revealed by a scoop neckline, I would note and comment to myself, nothing to that. Push up, push in. The underwire bra gives the sensuous illusion of a fuller breast, just a ploy to attract attention. About that time, I'd usually notice the shapely legs with silky stockings, the curve of the fanny moving under seductively tight clothing, the fragrance of some ultra-feminine perfume or hairspray or makeup, the flutter of the eyelashes, and of course, the delightfully sweet smile, and all of my intellectual circuits would be short-circuiting. I used to think that intellect was capable of mastering all challenges, but alas, I've always found the ladies my undoing. Maybe as I get older, that craziness stops, I used to think. It doesn't. I've always said if it wasn't for race cars, boats, airplanes, motorcycles, engines, and fancy ladies, I'd be a rich man by now. But I don't know why I'd want to be without those things to spend it on. "What will it be, guys?" she said casually. "Can you catch us back in a few minutes?" I asked, with the full intention of enjoying the view as she turned and walked away. Do you see that, Todd?" I elbowed him to emphasize my enthusiasm. "Yeah, it's okay," he said in a monotone. Todd was always good with the ladies. His mannerisms were more casual and relaxed than mine. It almost seemed to be not that important to him, which I knew wasn't true, but he was able to project that impression. As hard as I tried to control my aggressive tendencies, because I felt that it scares the girls off, I always felt in my mind that they knew I was hanging off the ceiling, howling like a wolf internally. "Why did you send her away?" he inquired. "I wanted to discuss what we're going to drink first." I half-truthed, not wanting him to know that it was a ploy to check her out on departure, in order to avoid the condescending, "Oh, Wildt," that would surely follow. He always seemed to have more self-control than I when confronted with breathtaking femininity, or at least had me convinced he could take it or leave it. On the other hand, a small piece of me used to wonder if he just delighted in needling me about my blatant response and was willing to subdue his own in order to make me feel even more foolish. It made no difference, in any event. I could no more control my response than our English motorcycles could contain their oil. We spent the evening talking and enjoying the girls, who somehow had us convinced we had a chance. Unfortunately, I was so blasted, the only thing I could think to talk to them about was whether snakes came out at night or not. Somehow we'd forgotten how truly grubby we were. Alcohol and women have an amazing effect on males. We were vaguely aware they were trying to close the place now. Somehow we paid the bill, tipped the waitresses, and found ourselves confronting our trusty steeds. It was a warm night, so we decided we'd ride for a while to sober up and find some place to camp for the night. For some reason, my BSA was always a one-kick starter. No, that wasn't common to the breed. Mine was an aberration. Todd's Norton was the more typical recalcitrant example of the period.
Guys. I guess things never change. They behave the same today as 40 years ago. While Todd tries to start his hard-starting Norton in downtown St. Louis, I thought I'd take a moment to introduce myself. I'm Patty Borowitz, and also to check Bill's progress on his current motorcycle trip. When we last saw him, he was crossing the Pennsylvania state line. Let's see where he is now.
Well, as you can see, folks, we're getting closer to our destination now. And by the way, we haven't even really started talking about exactly what this trip is about and where we're going. And we're going to be doing some of that. We're going to a little town in upstate New York called Carlisle. It's a town where I was brought up with from the time I was 5 years old till the time I was 12 years old. And I've always had kind of a yearning to go back and just have one more look at where I spent my boyhood days. We'll explain a little bit more about this as we go along. In any event, we're still on Route 20. I've really enjoyed it. I dread going on the interstate because I know it's just going to be mile after mile of exactly the same thing. And this is an ever-changing scenery. One thing I do have to do, though, New York is not an enlightened state. They still insist on having non-riders inflict their fears on riders. So I have to put the helmet on or I can't proceed any farther, and that's what I got this out for.
It's strange. Bill is really very safety conscious, but he doesn't like wearing a helmet and has strong views about it. He is an avid supporter of the work of ABATE, the organization that fights for motorcyclist rights. While he rides into New York, let's return to the story of his other motorcycle trip some 40 years ago, as he waits for Todd to get his bike started in downtown St. Louis.
While sitting on my machine, engine idling, waiting for Todd's machine to surrender to his attack, it suddenly struck me that this was a perfect area for an adult version of hide-and-seek on motorcycles. I kicked it in gear and ripped down the street into the night. My lights had given up early in the evening, so I could disappear easily into the night. A couple of blocks away, I became aware I was traveling on a one-way street the wrong way. I immediately ducked into an alley to avoid any unpleasantness with the police. The alley wasn't lighted, so I had to go extremely slow and sort of feel my way along. Naturally, it was a dead-end alley. I turned around and worked my way back out. As I got closer to the street, I saw Todd going slowly past the alley, looking around intently, trying to find me. I shut my motor off and coasted to the mouth of the alley. I watched him disappear down the next street as he continued his search for me. As I looked around, I remember being surprised by how quiet this downtown was compared to Chicago. There was nothing else moving and no noise other than the distant sound of Todd Norton coughing and wheezing, a reluctant participant in the low-speed search. I'd better catch up to him, I thought, as I could barely hear him now. I fired up the Beezer and took off into the night to ambush him. I laid my siege carefully. I was riding on a street parallel to him now. He was not aware of my presence. Up ahead I spotted a bus terminal, dimly lit and closed. I accelerated easily in order to position myself in the terminal to lay in wait for my prey. But I didn't want to rev the engine hard and be detected. I coasted along the wall inside the terminal. Apparently, the buses entered the terminal from the street Todd was on and exited on the street I had just been using. I positioned myself between two parked buses and waited. Sure enough, here came Todd, standing on the foot pegs so he could see better and just chugging along in first gear. After he got maybe 100 feet past, I kicked it in gear, blasted up alongside him, and pulled a wheelie, announcing my successful seek and destroy mission. In my own mind, I stood the bike on the rear wheel and maybe 100 miles an hour, pipes blasting and demonstrating clever authority. In reality, I suppose, I was doing 30 miles an hour, first gear, and the front wheel perhaps 6 inches off the ground. You see, Todd and I weren't very good at wheelies. Oh, we wanted to be all right, but somehow we didn't have the knack. Todd, more seriously drunk than I, apparently decided now was the time to do wheelies. I had just set my front wheel down when he blasted by me with his front wheel maybe 12 inches in the air. A pretty good wheelie, I thought, and definitely better than mine. I certainly couldn't let that stand. I pulled in the clutch, revved the motor, dumped the clutch as I passed by him, and lofted the front end maybe 2 feet in the air. It sort of startled me, probably the tall gearing, but I felt like I almost lost it, and we were going pretty fast, perhaps 50 miles an hour, even though it was just first gear. Sure enough, he came blasting by with at least as good a wheelie stand as mine, maybe better. I'd had enough. We were getting a little too carried away, but it was my turn, and rather than not compete, I decided to stand on the seat and go by him with sort of a let's change stunts and call the wheelie contest a draw type of initiative. Discretion being the better part of valor and all, I reasoned unilaterally. But no, Todd was really feeling his oats and wanted to hammer home his triumph. He blasted up next to me and signaled me with one index finger, indicating, "Watch this." I watched him accelerate forward hard and shift into second gear. He was a good 20 or 30 feet ahead of me now. I saw his right elbow violently rising and falling a couple of times as he revved the engine mercilessly with the clutch in. Suddenly, the big Norton was pointed skyward. I could see the entire top of the machine, the front fender, the gauges, and the top of his helmet. What a wheel stand! It was magnificent! The sparks started coming from the bottom of his majestic steed. The moment in time etched in my memory. The rear fender was trying to scoop up asphalt. Suddenly, Todd dropped his feet to the ground and released his speeding upright mount that was now clearly bent on coming over backward, the rear fender screaming its objection to no avail. Todd tried to run with the machine, but it was just going way too fast. As his valiant effort failed after his first step and he was rolling on the ground now, the bike was on its way over backwards like a giant redwood being felled by the woodsman's axe, and it smashed into the street upside down and backwards, and still traveling amazingly fast. The machine violently thrashed as if it were exploding, first one way, then another. The shriek of tearing metal was deafening, and then it was over. The still of the night had returned. Debris lay everywhere. I stopped my machine near where Todd lay. "Are you all right, man?" I hollered while removing my helmet, unable to conceal my alarm. "Are you all right?" I excitedly asked again as I got to him. He looked up at me and said, "Can I wheelie or can I wheelie?" "You crazy jerk," I exclaimed as I helped him get up. "Are you okay?" "Sure," he said, sort of drawn out, as he pulled his helmet off. As I looked at him, I knew then what I was dealing with. He was totally and completely drunk. Not tipsy or high, but nearly unconscious drunk. I surveyed the area. Debris everywhere. His bedroll, clothes, spare parts, tools, mirrors, tail light, seat, parts lying everywhere, like this had been a major accident. Just then, a car came up upon us, the headlights illuminating the scene. Todd dropped back down on the ground now to sort of take stock of his condition, plus I'm not sure he could really stand any longer. A man was getting out of the car now, a look of shock on his face as though he was witnessing a death. He couldn't continue on without running over something. That's how widespread the debris was scattered. As he was getting out of the car, I spotted Todd's .45 on the street. That darn gun, I thought. I was pretty drunk too, but sobered up fast. I had to get rid of this well-meaning guy fast before he spotted the gun and Todd and I wound up in jail. "Everything's all right. We're just fooling around," I stated rapidly, approaching him so he would look at me instead of the ground. "Everything is cool. My buddy just tipped over," I told him while sort of gently pushing him back into his car. I just wanted him out of there. "Are you okay?" he hollered toward Todd before pulling his door shut. Todd just looked over with sort of a drunken half smile and gave a wave and another long stretched out, "Sure." The man backed his car down the street, turned and disappeared, seeking another route. The smell of gas was strong now, and I rushed over to pick up his bike. Todd still didn't have any great deal of interest in getting things back together. "How bad is it?" he asked from the ground where he was still reclining. I ignored the question and rolled the bike a few feet forward out of the puddle of gas that had leaked from the monoblocks while on its side. I was surprised. The bike visually looked sort of bad. Handlebars bent, mirror smashed, seat torn up, tail light destroyed, rear fender bent, but actually it was halfway rideable. I started trying to straighten out the handlebars. "Give me a hand with this thing, Todd." "You shouldn't have sent that guy away. Maybe he would have helped," he said lazily, still in his reclined position on the ground. "You and that darn gun," I scolded. "You're going to get us arrested." The gun, I'd forgotten about it for a moment when I smelled the gas. I quickly went and retrieved it and put it back under the seat of the Norton in the bike's tool compartment. "What gun?" Todd inquired, his speech quite slurred and slow. Apparently everything was in slow motion for him. Never mind. I knew it was no use at the moment to explain anything to him. I gathered up the stuff that was scattered around and piled it by the bike. Then I gathered Todd up and took him over by the curb. We sat down on the curb and slowly I outlined the situation for him. "Your bike is rideable, with some minor repairs," I stated. "But I don't think you're in any shape to ride," I went on. "This is sort of a lousy place to camp. Looks like an industrial area that will get pretty active in the morning. But there is a grassy area that looks like several vacant lots across the street." He looked at me, sort of a startled look on his face, and said in carefully selected, concise words, as if he were stone sober at a business meeting, "I'm not going to sleep there. That looks like a dump." He was quite pushed out of shape, like it was clearly beneath him. Boy, this guy is snaky when he drinks, I remember thinking. "Well, Todd, then we'll have to repack your stuff and repair your motorcycle." "What's wrong with my motorcycle?" he demanded, like he had just arrived on the scene. "Are you with the program, Todd? You know you just crashed your bike, right?" "Oh yeah, how bad is it?" "Are you sure you can ride it?" I inquired again. "Yeah, I'm fine." I looked at him skeptically. Well, we really didn't have much choice. This really was an unsatisfactory place to sleep. "See what you can do with that rear fender, Todd. I'll try to straighten the handlebars." "What's the matter with the rear fender?" he inquired. Oh, brother, I thought, he's still screwed up. "Never mind, just repack your stuff. I'll fix the fender," I instructed, resigning myself to the fact that I was going to have to fix the bike if we were going to go anywhere. About an hour after the incident, we were ready to go again.
Yikes. That's not funny. Bill said this is a funny story. I fail to see the humor. We'll pick the story up again in a moment. Perhaps the funny part comes next. Right now, we're going to check in with Bill on his current trip. He made it to Buffalo, New York on the second day as was planned. He was so beat he couldn't tape anything until he got some rest. He was out like a light for the whole night. Let's see how he's doing at the start of day 3.
It seems to me that I remember a song with the lyric, "I awoke this morning to the sound of thunder." Well, guess what? That's exactly what happened. After 2 absolutely gorgeous hot summer days that I've enjoyed, went to bed last night, or should I say collapsed in bed last night. Apparently the 2 days caught up with me and I was absolutely wiped out. And I stopped this time at kind of a little ma and pa motel, and I do this for a reason. And again, you're going to learn more about this as we go along in the program, but I specifically didn't want to go to a chain or something like that. I wanted to go to a ma and pa place on Route 20. In any event, went to bed last night, looking at my route. I'm right on time. We are now 650 miles from Chicago, about 300 miles each day, just as I had planned, and today should be the final leg, assuming, of course, the rain doesn't really slow me down. Now, it was pouring out this morning. I went and took my shower and all that, and now it seems to have brightened up a little bit, although according to the weather, it looks like it's going to be kind of storms all day long moving through. I want to thank you, Bob Kuchera. That's Cooch. You've met him many times on Motorsports Unlimited. Cooch is the fellow that does the president of the Chicagoland Toys for Tots Motorcycle Parade, and I originally met him because he's one of the big shots for J.C. Whitney, Buyer, and so he's given me a lot of advice on what I should take for this, because as I've said so many times, I'm not, in fact, hopefully if I put this program together the way I hope I'm putting it together, you've already kind of seen that 40 years ago was the last time I did a road trip, and it was a complete disaster. Now, let me say this. Yes, it was a complete disaster. We didn't get where we were trying to get to, and yes, we did pretty much damage. My motorcycle was a little bit damaged, and my friend's motorcycle was destroyed, and we had to come home limping. But interestingly enough, it was a disaster at the time, but for some reason, I can remember literally every detail of it here some 40 years later, so perhaps it wasn't such a disaster. It was fun. We did have some fun. In any event, on this road trip, I went to get some advice of the expert, Doc Joe. You've met him, the Toys for Tots doctor, Dr. Joe Zadowski. He's a very experienced rider. He was the one that told me, Bill, without a windshield, you can only do about 150 miles a day. With a windshield, you can do 400 to 500 miles a day, and he had just come back from a 3,700-mile road trip. Anyway, Bob Kuchera, so, I think I mentioned earlier, it was sort of funny. I don't want to go through the whole story. I had to make a last-minute dash out to LaSalle the day before, or actually the afternoon before I left the next morning to get some final detailed things. And one of it was Bob Kuchera's absolute insistence, Bill, you have to have a rain suit. He said, you just have to. You cannot not have a rain suit. You've got to have it. I really didn't want to, because I said, well, if it rains, I'll stay in a hotel. Well, as it turns out, you do kind of have to, because it might rain 2-3 days. Who knows? So I did grab one, and I didn't mention it before because I'd hoped that would I thought maybe it would jinx things if I mentioned the rain suit. Didn't mention the rain suit, but yes, I am prepared. I do have a rain suit. As a matter of fact, it's really pretty nice, and I can see once again we're talking about people that do this touring stuff really know what they're doing. This stuff's also well thought out. I'm really impressed with it. The way they have this stuff is supposed to fit over your clothes, so it's an elastic band around the waist so that you can kind of pull it up quickly in the case of rain. There's like a sort of like a web meshing. I'm sure you can't see that inside. The jacket has reflective, if you see these, the white stripes. I don't know if you can see that on the air or not, but they're real reflective. They really show up at night. I picked this one because it said Milwaukee on it. And I said to myself, well, maybe that's a good omen, Milwaukee. And actually, it's really nice. I like it. So didn't expect to have to use it, but I'm ready.
I hope you noticed, during that piece, Bill said the trip 40 years ago was fun. A disaster, but fun. Maybe the fun part comes now. Janine?
Are you sure you can ride? I asked. I'm fine. No, you're not fine, I stopped him mid-sentence. And I don't want you to think you're fine. I want you to realize that you're drunk and to be very careful. Okay. I couldn't tell if he was hearing me. I waited for him to get the cantankerous Norton started. I then fired up the Beezer again. I decided I'd stay about 20 feet behind him to keep an eye on him for at least a while. He pulled away from the curb and accelerated normally in first gear. I heard a clicking sound, like something stuck in the wheel striking something else on every revolution. He shifted into second, and the clicking was even more rapid. He looked over his left shoulder toward the rear wheel and the puzzling sound. As he did so, he inadvertently steered slightly right. He continued looking and listening, unaware that he was turning, and of course, unable to hear me yelling inside my helmet for him to look out. He veered into the curb at about 40 miles per hour, no more than 100 yards from where the previous crash had taken place. The bike scrubbed the curb and straightened momentarily as he looked to see what was going on. He flopped over the curb. He did what appeared to be a couple of perfect shoulder rolls. The bike, unfortunately, was not so lucky. The wheels had stayed in the street, with the sidewalls of the tires scraping the vertical portion of the curb. The bike, leaning more and more, its wheels unable to stay under it, just flopped over and slid along the top of the curb. Todd, separated from the machine, was doing his gymnastic routine unobstructed. The bike's path, while sliding on its side, was not unimpeded. The bike's slide came to an abrupt halt. The headlight and instruments took the initial impact of striking the light pole. I remember thinking, damn, there goes our only working light. As I got off my machine and removed my helmet, I was a little stunned. Maybe shell-shocked is a better word. I intended to keep an eye on him, but we hadn't even gotten a half a block away from the previous crash. Oh, that one hurt me, he moaned as he staggered back toward his bike, where I was also headed. Where do you hurt? I inquired, without much interest. I was a little annoyed at him for crashing again after all the work I'd been through. My shoulder, he murmured, with so much agony that I realized he was really hurt. And now I felt a little guilty for being annoyed. Is it broken? I asked. I don't know. He was holding it with his other hand. My mother and sister are both nurses. Let me check it, I said, like I was Marcus Welby, MD. Okay, he was satisfied with my medical credentials. Lift your arm all the way up, I counseled. I can't, it hurts. He cringed as his arm had only gone up halfway. That's all right, Todd, it's not broken, or you wouldn't have been able to do that much, I said as a firm diagnosis. Good, he responded, but it really hurts. No problem, Todd. It's your right arm anyhow. You don't need it to operate the clutch. I can see from here that your front brake lever is destroyed. You'll only need your right arm to operate the throttle. I guess you're right, he said, sitting down on the grass. What are you doing? I inquired, watching him get comfortable. We've got work to do on your bike. Oh, there's no way I'll be able to help you with the bike. I hurt too much. I knew Todd well, and the statement was absolute. I could talk him into lots of stuff, but when he got that tone in his voice, I knew it was hopeless. I wrenched the bike away from its light pole captor and surveyed the damage. This time it was serious. The speedometer and tach were junk, as was the front brake lever and the headlight. Of greater concern was the tach drive that stuck out of the right-hand forward engine side case of the Nortons. It had been smashed, but it also had cracked the case it was mounted on. The case was already leaking oil. Naturally, the personal junk, bedroll and like that, was scattered all over the place again. This accident was far more serious than the one before it. I started working on the front brake lever because the front wheel wouldn't turn. It wasn't long before I realized, number one, the front brake lever wasn't repairable, even temporarily. Number two, that wasn't what was keeping the front wheel from turning. The front fender was crunched into the front tire. After several unsuccessful minutes of trying to bend or pry the front fender, "Hurry up, Bill, I'm getting sleepy." "Huh? You jerk. Get over here and help. I think we've got a serious problem. I can't pry the fender free and we don't have the oddball Whitworth tools to unbolt it." "Oh no, don't damage my fender," he cautioned. "You know how long I spent finding one." I knew all right. He spent a lot of time reconditioning this bike to original condition. A 650cc Norton Manxman was quite rare, even then. I started thinking that maybe it was a good idea he hadn't come over to look at the bike yet. I didn't know how he'd take it. The machine had literally crumpled up and disintegrated on this trip. "That's okay, Todd," I said, trying to keep him where he was on the grass to protect him from the reality of his wounded bike. Too late. He was wobbling over. To my surprise, he didn't bat an eyelash as he stood next to me evaluating the damaged fender. "Can't get it off, huh?" he questioned. "No, the bolts are slightly rusted, and only a perfect fitting wrench will remove them. We didn't bring all the Whitworth tools." I continued working with the small pry bar. "Get out of the way, I'll get it off," Todd commanded from over my shoulder. I turned to find him pointing his .45 at the front fender. I fell backward. The look in his eyes told the whole story. He was still totally drunk. I'd been so involved I'd forgotten how drunk we were. "No, Todd, you'll have the cops here in minutes if you start blasting with that cannon." That seemed to make sense to him. Anyway, he didn't pull the trigger. I packed the gun under the seat again and gathered up the bedroll and stuff while he started ripping at the fender. When everything but the fender was made as right as it could be made, we both went to work on it, alternately bending the brackets back and forth with pry bar and pliers until finally, nearly an hour later, we had broken it off and tossed it aside. It's funny how British bikes were. Two of the mounting brackets on my front fender had cracked and broken from vibration during the trip. It was ready to fall off, and his almost needed a torch to remove. While we were working on the fender, I suggested we consider camping here. "I want to find a regular campsite," he sternly reiterated, with as clear a voice as if he hadn't had a single drink. "You know, we don't have any headlights or taillights at all now, and we may not be able to get your front wheel to turn," I reasoned. "I'm not going to sleep in a dump. They attract bears." He was adamant. We kept working. I had to start the Norton for him because his shoulder hurt, but at least we were underway and a little farther out of town. Not really country, sort of a sparsely populated industrial area, and what looked like an interstate highway running on an angle and intersecting the road we were on maybe a half-mile ahead. Just then a squad car zipped by going the other way. We both looked back and sure enough, his brake lights were on. He'd spotted us with no lights. We hit the throttles and tried to put distance on him before he got turned around. As we got to the interstate, we could see there was no entrance or exit. I motioned for Todd to slow down. As we got into first gear, I waved for him to follow me, hoping he would remember the off-road lesson from the night before. We went down the gully bordering the road we were on and up the other side. I looked over and he was still with me. I was going real slow, concerned about maybe a barbed wire fence or something. My goal was to get us up onto the interstate. I figured we'd be home free then because obviously the squad car couldn't follow. As we approached the interstate embankment, we found we had to drop down into another gully before going up. Down we went. The vertical slope on the other side was almost straight up. As we started up, I knew there was no chance. The grass was soaking wet with dew, and our approach offered no opportunity to pick up speed, especially at night. I grabbed my front brake and started the slide backwards. Todd had less choice than I, with no front brake. He just bailed off the other side. The four of us, 2 bikes, 2 people, slid into an unceremonious heap at the bottom of the gully. Dead silence around us. We didn't want to move a muscle and give away our position. We could hear the squad car radio with its static police chatter. 219 in progress, code 3, see the man at the liquor store. The squad car spotlight was passing over where we lay. We were just inches under its beam, but we were okay because that was as low as the beam could scan because of the high ground between us and the car. The beacon had stopped moving now and was just lighting the side of the highway embankment. Now a flashlight beam was flitting around. Oh damn, a real eager beaver, I thought. We looked at each other, both thinking the same thing, our hearts pounding loud enough so that we could hear each other's and hoping the cops couldn't. Abruptly, the spotlight was off, and we heard the squad car's tires spin in the gravel as it departed. We lay there for a few minutes, fearing a trap. Soon we were removing our helmets quietly, looking at each other and simultaneously putting our finger up to our lips, each signaling the other to keep silent. Slowly, we peeked our heads up over the top of the gully, separating us from the road. Darkness and silence everywhere. We both burst out laughing. You would have thought we were bank robbers on the way we were behaving, and I remembered wondering what made people run from the police when they have trouble rather than go to them. I thought you said the way to make a hill like that was to hit it straight on, Todd inquired, needling me. Oh yeah, it is, but this looked like a perfect campsite to me, so I decided to stop, I responded without smiling. He looked at me for a moment, looked around, then back at me, and I burst out laughing again. Well, this is your regular campsite tonight, Todd. I doubt if we can get out of this gully with all the dew on the grass, and it's not really a bad spot. He agreed. I think he was starting to sober up. His mood was changing, and he wanted to know how much I thought it would take to get his bike repaired tomorrow. Oh, not much, I lied. Boy, was he in for a shock in the morning.
Fun? That's fun? Guys are absolutely crazy. That's not fun at all. Shopping is fun. Crashing your motorcycle, injuring yourself, being chased by the police, they both could have ended up in jail. That's not even a little bit fun. On the other hand, the current trip does look like fun. Let's check back in with Bill, who wanted to do one more thing before he left Buffalo, New York, if the weather cooperated and the sun came out. Boy, did the sun come out.
Of course, the sun never cooperates when you want to, when you've got a subject to shoot at that you can't move. I went by here last night. Actually went by it. I ended up staying about 5 miles down the road. In case I didn't mention it, yeah, this is Buffalo, New York, and I did make it to Buffalo, New York on the second day, just kind of as planned. And I don't want to make it sound like I had a huge plan. I really don't do things that way, but I had sort of an outline, and I wanted to do 300 miles each day. And actually yesterday was 650 miles on the odometer. So I'm kind of right on schedule and everything. And yeah, if you can't read that behind me, it says, welcome to Ralph Wilson Stadium, home of the Bills. That's the Buffalo Bills. So I'm in Buffalo, New York. By the way, one other thing, I've just got to say something. I'm almost taking this bike for granted now. This is a 1982 Suzuki GS650G. Without a doubt, the most remarkable motorcycle I've ever owned. I just can't believe this thing. It's great performance. I'm running 65, 70 miles an hour all the way hour after hour. The motor's running along at 6,000 RPM. Doesn't seem to mind it. I cannot tell you how impressed I am with that. And on top of that, sat in the rain all night, and my BSA, I'll guarantee you, wouldn't have started for 2 days. In fact, if a dog were to water the front wheel on my BSA, the bike wouldn't start for 2 days. So I am really impressed. This kind of this Japanese reliability, which is legendary, kind of makes this kind of thing going on a road trip actually doable.
A huge difference from 40 years ago. Let's return to St. Louis and see how and if Bill and Todd got themselves out of their most recent disaster 40 years ago.
The morning seemed to come almost instantly, the bright sun forcing its way into my consciousness. As I struggled to recall where I was, The traffic noise seemed to overwhelm me. Wonder what time it is, I thought. You awake, Todd? I called, starting to remember where we were and why. Yeah, sort of, came the anguished reply from somewhere on the other side of our pile of motorcycles. I looked around at our surroundings. Nice grassy slopes, a warm day. The sun had apparently burned off the dew. Everything was dry and smelled like summer, fresh, bright, and alive. Even the feel of the warm grass against the back of my neck as I leaned back against the slope felt stimulating. I was trying to convince myself to get up and get going. Maybe 15 minutes had passed. "Oh, my shoulder is killing me," exclaimed Todd, breaking the silence. "Still hurts, huh?" I inquired lazily. He dragged himself to his feet, dropping the sleeping bag as he did so. I could see he was trying to take stock of his body, to see what kind of shape he was in. "Well, there is absolutely no way I can ride a motorcycle," he stated, in one of those absolute tones, indicating there was no budging him on his position. I knew we had to terminate the trip to Kansas City. In addition to Todd's injuries, his bike was in very bad shape, and I wondered if we could even make it home. We would have to take the interstate, which was roughly parallel to Route 66, as time was now of the essence. "Do you have an alternate plan for our return home, or did you figure we'd just live here?" I inquired, pointing out the obvious. "You're not talking me into anything. I can't ride, and that's final." He was holding his shoulder and standing in sort of a contorted way. I didn't say anything. I just waited for his proposal. "My brother is on his honeymoon down here. We'll get him to bring the bike home in his trunk, and I'll ride with him in the car." "I'm sure he'll be thrilled to see you," I said sarcastically. "Where's he staying?" "Where is he staying?" I asked again, realizing now that he was stumped. "Maybe you can ride around and check out the motels," Todd suggested. Furrowing my brow to indicate my lack of enthusiasm for this idea. "St. Louis is a big city, Todd. It would take a year to find somebody if you didn't know where to look." "Guess you're right. I think we're beat then. I don't have any more ideas." "What do you mean we?" I said, borrowing a line from an old joke. "Let's not worry about it right this moment. First, let's pack up the stuff," I said, thinking maybe he'd feel better if he used the arm a little. "My bike is junk now," he stated slowly and firmly as he looked it over. He was kind of despondent, and I felt a little sorry for him. "Aw, it's not bad," I lied. "You'd be surprised how rugged bikes are. Most of the damage is cosmetic. We'll have it fixed up in no time." I was cheerleading a little, I suppose, but it did seem to lighten his burden. We got the bikes packed again, and I assaulted the interstate banking. The big Beezer easily motored up and over the now dry hillside. I parked it along the side of the interstate and scooted back down the slope on the seat of my pants in my hands. Todd was still sitting in the gully with a look on his face that suggested he didn't like any of the options he had. "Well, what do you think, Todd?" I asked flatly. "I can't ride. I told you that. My shoulder is killing me." I could tell by his tone he was starting to soften his position. "Here are the choices as I see it," I told him. "Either we can leave your bike here, maybe cover it with branches or something, and you can ride with me on the back of mine. After we get home, you can drive back with your car and get it. Or I can start it for you, ride it up the hill with you on the bike. Then you can see if you can ride it on the highway." "My shoulder hurts," he started. "Will it hurt any less if you starve to death in this ravine and the buzzards pick your bones clean?" I reasoned. "Okay, but take it easy going up the hill," he finally agreed. With him on the bike, I had to take a little run at it, so it was necessary to first ride up the other side of the ravine, turn around, and make a more serious assault. "Hey, take it easy," he hollered in my ear as I made the approach. We dropped into the ravine, bottoming the heavily loaded bike suspension. "Ow, my shoulder," he hollered. Couldn't slow down now as we continued the charge up the slope, engine howling, rear wheels spinning, dirt flying. I'm not going to read this. I'm sure you have some idea of what Todd yelled. He completed his comment as we topped the hill and I parked his bike next to mine. We were on our way home now. Todd was able to ride, but I had to start the bike for him every time we stopped for fuel or oil, or both. The sign on the interstate near where we spent the night said Chicago 297 miles. How depressing. We elected to use the interstate instead of Route 66 to return home because speed, rather than enjoying the trip, was now the objective. We'd agreed not to stop for anything that wasn't essential, and maybe, just maybe, we could make it before dark, a somewhat critical issue as neither of us had any lights. As I looked over at Todd, I honestly felt sorry for him. I didn't want to tell him, but the bike really was trashed. The broken, smashed headlight, the instruments wired to the handlebars, the missing front fender, making what was left of the twisted brackets look out of place. The gas tank, which just a few days ago was perfect, now showed the scars of the welding I had to do. The engine was weeping oil steadily out of the cracked side case, gooing up everything from that point back. The seat had been damaged too, and of course, the rear fender and what was left of the tail light assembly completed the picture, not to mention Todd himself. Normally, he would ride bolt upright in a decidedly neat posture, but today he was somewhat slumped over, his right shoulder dropped a few inches below the level of the left. The look on his face denoted agony. I knew his shoulder must be really painful because he hadn't even mentioned the blood on his arm. When he went over backwards in the first crash, he picked up some abrasions. Bikers call it road rash. From rolling in the street. The blood was dry now, but pretty nasty looking. The fact he wasn't talking about it was clear evidence, pointing at how much his shoulder was hurting. To his credit, he soldiered on. Mile after mile, we just kept going. The BSA and Norton achieving a sort of resonance at 70 miles an hour, like a couple of slightly different tuning forks humming. The resonance was bugging you after a while, making you accelerate away or slow down to change the frequency, but still we soldiered on. This was really quite boring now. The Midwest doesn't offer much scenery to look at, and after a while the interstate, while safer and faster than Route 66, became kind of a mental Chinese water torture. I looked forward to exiting the interstate for refueling. Todd and I were rumbling into the gas station, hopefully the last stop before Chicago. It was amazing how once we stopped worrying about the bikes, they seemed to stop falling apart. You know, Todd, I don't want to jinx us this close to home, but the bikes have been humming right along. I sort of wanted to cheer him up. He looked so forlorn. That's because everything that can fall off or break has either fallen off or broken, he said evenly, without emotion, resigned to his misery. After filling up with gas and topping off his oil supply again, it was time for the final push. About 30 minutes after we left the last gas station, the Norton started clanking. I rode alongside Todd for a while, occasionally holding a cupped hand alongside my helmet where my ear was, then gesturing toward his motor to make sure he was aware of it. He refused to acknowledge my signals or do anything but keep looking straight ahead. I knew Todd well. This meant he didn't want to talk about it, period. Near home, the clanking had become so loud, people on the sidewalks were looking. I looked back and he gestured with his arm. You know, fist clenched, elbow at 45-degree angle, up yours. The Norton was tossed into Todd's garage after the trip and eventually sold for parts. A few weeks later, we bought dirt bikes.
I can see why they decided to go dirt riding. Now, here we are, 40 years later, and Bill thoroughly enjoying his road trip. Let's take just a peek at some of the lovely upstate New York scenery.
beautiful. I've never been to upstate New York, but I'm looking forward to next week's show for a better look. It'll have to be next week, though, because we're out of time with only enough left to acknowledge the fine work of our award-winning production team, including Chuck Itzenthaler, Sue Cassanda, our webmaster, Frank Barbalace, Rena Borwitz, and Tom McGrady. Special thanks to JBTV's Jerry Bryant. Music is created for us by independent artists Roger Pauley and Jerry Herbert. Of course, we have to take a moment to thank the stars of this edition of Motorsports Unlimited: Janine Lauschat, Patty Borwitz, and our host, Bill Wildt. Me, I'm Samantha Bentley, looking forward to finding out what this trip is all about. Bill says it'll all be clear next week. Thanks for watching. See you next week.
This program made possible in part by support from ABC Auto Parts, located on Ashland Avenue at 138th Street in Blue Island, Illinois.
This program made possible in part by support from Copy That, located in the County Farm Plaza at County Farm Road and Army Trail Road in Carroll Stream, Illinois.
This program made possible in part by support from Bridgestone Firestone and your local Bridgestone Firestone tire retailers.
Motorsports Unlimited is produced by Bill Wildt, president of the Motorsport Advancement Crusade.
This program made possible in part by support from PB Food Products, located on 47th Street at Western Avenue in Chicago, Illinois.
This program made possible in part by support from J.C. Whitney & Company, located just off I-80 at the Utica exit in LaSalle, Illinois.
This program made possible in part by support from the Chicagoland Toys for Tots Motorcycle Parade, held on Western Avenue in Chicago, the first Sunday in December.
This program made possible in part by support from Jimmy's Red Hots, located on Grant Avenue and Pulaski Road in Chicago.
Motorsports Unlimited was created to raise public consciousness, understanding, and appreciation of the motorsport community and their activities. You can contact us by email at msutv.com, or you can write to Motorsport, P.O. Box 66242, Chicago, Illinois, 60666. We enjoy hearing from our audience. Please let us know what you think.
Next week on Motorsports Unlimited, we explain what this ride is all about. It has to do with this 1952 photograph of the white building on the right side of the screen. Join us next week on Motorsports Unlimited as we continue the story.
So that's it, another edition of Motorsports Unlimited and the lovely ladies of motorsports. And be with us next week because we'll have something real exciting. Bill Wildt's going to have the lovely ladies, and just about anything can happen right here on Motorsports Unlimited. Every week at this time, we bring you the best in motorsports. So be seeing ya. Bye-bye. And keep on rocking.